The Wild West wasn't all gunslingers and gold rushes. It was a daily battle against dirt, germs, and, well, some pretty questionable hygiene habits. Without modern comforts, people came up with creative and often shocking ways to stay clean, or at least try to. Take washing up, for example. Women washed their faces with stream water because baths were rare and privacy didn't exist. Outhouses, filthy wooden sheds with no toilet paper, leaves and corn cobs had to do. Even Lysol, the cleaning product, was misused for personal hygiene, causing more harm than good. The Wild West wasn't just rough, it was downright dirty. Let's explore some of the untangling hygiene practices in the Wild West and how they compare to our modern standards. Number 15. The truth about infrequent showers. Bathing in the Wild West wasn't just rare, it was often considered unnecessary. Many pioneers and cowboys believed frequent bathing could weaken their immune systems and make them more susceptible to illness. Add to that the scarcity of clean water, and it's easy to see why most folks skipped regular showers altogether. Cowboys often wore the same clothes for days, or even weeks, creating the perfect environment for fungal infections and other hygiene-related problems. For settlers, bathing was more of an event than a habit. It required hauling water, heating it, and filling a tub, hardly a quick task. While modern hygiene standards would be appalling, for them, it was simply life. Water was scarce, labor was demanding, and cleanliness often took a backseat to survival. The result? A Wild West lifestyle that was rugged, gritty, and a little or a lot stinky. So never take for granted the ease and convenience of a hot, accessible shower. Number 14. Unbelievable medicines of the Wild West. Medicine in the Wild West was as wild as the times themselves. With limited knowledge and resources, pioneers turned to some unexpected remedies. Cocaine, for instance, was a go-to treatment for toothaches in the 1880s, available in over-the-counter toothache drops. It worked wonders for numbing pain, though people were blissfully unaware of its addictive effects. And aspirin, a now common household remedy, didn't arrive until the late 1890s. So before that, whiskey was often used as a catch-all cure, whether for pain relief, sleep aid, or just to make life's hardships a bit more bearable. The lack of clean water and proper sanitation meant diseases like cholera and dysentery were rampant. Without antibiotics, pioneers relied on folk remedies and patent medicines, many of which were laced with alcohol, opium, or other potent substances. While some of these remedies may have had temporary benefits, they often came with serious side effects and risks. It's safe to say that we're lucky to live in an era where we can trust in the safety and effectiveness of modern medicine, even if they are not always perfect. Number 13. Families bathed in the same bathwater. Back in the Wild West, a bathtub was a rare luxury, far from the reach of most families. Hauling water, heating it, and filling a tub was time-consuming. For many, a weekly bath was the best they could manage. The iconic Sears, Roebuck, and Company catalogs of 1894 finally made bathtubs more accessible, but even then, the cost, equivalent to about $800 today, was steep. When families did get their hands on a tub, they had to make do with shared water. The oldest went first, enjoying the cleanest soak, while the youngest often had to endure murky leftovers. This tradition led to the Saturday night bath, ensuring everyone was clean for Sunday church. It may sound unhygienic now, but back then, practicality outweighed comfort. This communal bathing ritual is a vivid reminder of how much effort went into basic hygiene in the untamed frontier days. Number 12. Bug-infested beds made of straw. In the rugged days of the Wild West, comfort wasn't exactly a priority. Most folks slept on makeshift beds stuffed with straw or hay, often laid directly on the ground. Bed frames, if they existed at all, were a luxury reserved for the wealthy. While straw was better than the cold, hard ground, it had one major downside: It was a paradise for bugs. These straw beds became homes to fleas, mites, and all manner of creepy crawlies. Cleaning them was nearly impossible, so swapping out the straw regularly was the only way to manage the infestation. Despite the discomfort, these beds were common for pioneers, who considered them a small price to pay for a decent night's sleep. This scratchy, bug-ridden reality highlights just how challenging life was in the untamed West, where even the rest came with its fair share of struggles. Now, let's move to Number 11. Most people didn't have toilet paper. In the Wild West, toilet paper wasn't an option for most people, so creativity was key. So what do? Well, early pioneers used whatever they could find. Corn cobs, leaves, or pages from old magazines and catalogs. It wasn't until 1857 that Joseph Gaiety introduced medicated paper, sold in single sheets. While innovative for the time, it didn't gain widespread popularity. The game changed in 1890 when roll-style toilet paper, complete with a holder, entered the market. Still, it wasn't until the 1920s that toilet paper became a household staple. Before that, bathroom visits were far from the sanitized experience we know today. Outhouses were rudimentary, smelly, and often buggy, making the entire experience an ordeal. Life in the Wild West was rough, and something as simple as modern toilet paper highlights how much easier daily life has become. It's hard to imagine the grit it took to adapt to such primitive conditions. Number 10. Whiskey was often drank in place of a meal. When you think of the Wild West, you might picture cowboys enjoying hearty meals around a campfire. The reality? Food was often scarce, and diets were shockingly basic. Beans, dried meat, and hard biscuits made up most meals. But when even that wasn't available, whiskey often replaced a proper meal. Whiskey was cheap, easy to carry, and offered a quick burst of warmth and energy. For many, it was more than just a drink. It was a survival tool. Some even believed it had medicinal properties, using it to ward off sickness or numb pain. However, relying on whiskey came with its downsides, including dehydration and malnutrition, making it a poor substitute for real nourishment. The scarcity of fresh food and clean water often made eating an uphill battle. The reliance on whiskey paints a vivid picture of the resourcefulness and the struggles of life on the frontier. Number 9. Cowboy bandanas. In the Wild West, cowboy bandanas were far from just a fashion statement. These versatile pieces of cloth served as essential tools for basic survival and hygiene. With dirt, dust, and overwhelming smells as part of everyday life, bandanas provided much-needed protection. Cowboys tied them around their necks to shield their faces from choking dust during cattle drives or harsh winds on the open plains. They also doubled as makeshift air filters when the stench of outhouses, livestock, or unwashed bodies became unbearable. In an era where clean water was scarce and baths were infrequent, bandanas helped keep dirt and germs at bay. They were also handy for wiping sweat, cleaning tools, or even serving as an emergency bandage. While we now see bandanas as a Wild West symbol, back then, they were a practical necessity for tackling the rugged and often unsanitary conditions of frontier life. Number 8. The deadly toll of disease in the Wild West. In the Wild West, the disease was a silent killer. With limited access to clean water, basic hygiene, and proper medical care, illnesses like cholera, smallpox, and dysentery ravaged pioneer communities. Cholera, often spread through contaminated water, was especially feared, wiping out entire families and settlements. 9 out of 10 pioneers fell victim to diseases during their lifetime. Poor sanitation, crowded living conditions, and a lack of understanding about germs made staying healthy a near impossible task. Scurvy was common due to limited fresh fruits and vegetables, while outbreaks of measles and typhoid fever added to the deadly mix. Survival in the Wild West wasn't just about fending off bandits or braving the wilderness. It was also about avoiding the diseases that lurked in every corner. These health struggles remind us just how far we've come in understanding hygiene and preventing illness. Number 7. Live shows, a breeding ground for germs. Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows may have dazzled audiences with their thrilling reenactments, but behind the scenes, they were a hygiene nightmare. Performers and crew lived in dusty, crowded campsites with limited access to clean water or proper sanitation. The arenas, packed with spectators, turned into breeding grounds for germs. With no modern cleaning facilities, the risk of illnesses like typhoid or influenza ran high. Performers often traveled long distances under tough conditions, leaving little time for personal hygiene. The glamour of the Wild West shows masked the harsh realities of frontier life. While the entertainment captivated audiences, the lack of basic cleanliness exposed both performers and spectators to significant health risks. It's a stark reminder that even the brightest spots of Wild West history came with their own set of challenges. Number 6. Mercury for syphilis. In the Wild West, treating syphilis came with its own dangers. Mercury, widely used as a cure, was applied topically or ingested, despite its toxic properties. The treatment often caused more harm than good, leading to mercury poisoning with symptoms like severe pain, tremors, and even death. With limited medical knowledge, pioneers relied on such remedies out of desperation. The painful and invasive treatments were as harsh as the disease itself, leaving patients in agony. Mercury's use persisted for centuries, a grim reminder of the lack of effective medical options in the past. While syphilis was a significant health issue in the Wild West, its treatments often compounded the suffering of those afflicted. The use of mercury highlights the crude and dangerous practices that shaped early medicine, a far cry from the advancements we benefit from today. Number 5. Clean water was hard to come by. In the Wild West, clean water was one of the scarcest and most important resources. With no plumbing or filtration systems, pioneers had to rely on rainwater, wells, or rivers. Those living in more developed towns had access to rudimentary irrigation, but for settlers in remote areas, every sip of water was a hard-won battle. Showering and personal hygiene often took a back seat to survival. Bathing was rare, as hauling water was physically exhausting, and keeping it clean was nearly impossible. Even brushing teeth was considered a luxury, with many improvising using ash or salt. The lack of clean water wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. Contaminated sources led to outbreaks of diseases like dysentery and cholera, making access to safe water a life-or-death issue. The struggle for hydration and cleanliness in the Wild West underscores the resilience of those who lived in such bizarre, harsh, unforgiving conditions. Number 4. The struggle for sanitation and proper bathrooms. In the Wild West, indoor plumbing was a distant dream for most households. While cities like New York introduced basic plumbing as early as 1842, it wasn't until the 1920s that only about 1% of homes in the U.S. had access to indoor plumbing. For rural homes in the West, hand-pumped water was often the best option available. Bathrooms, as we know them, didn't exist. Instead, makeshift outhouses served as restrooms, essentially wooden sheds with holes in the ground. These primitive facilities were far from sanitary, often plagued by unpleasant odors, flies, and the risk of contaminating nearby water sources. This lack of proper sanitation created significant health risks, with illnesses like cholera and dysentery running rampant. For pioneers, basic hygiene was a challenge. Bandanas and makeshift cleaning methods were their only defenses against dirt and germs, but they did the best with what they had. It's no wonder that something as simple as indoor plumbing was considered a luxury in the Wild West. Number 3. Soaps were made with animal fat. In the Wild West, soap was a far cry from the luxury bars we enjoy today. Instead of rows of scented, foamy options, soap was a basic blend of animal fat, lye, water, and occasionally, herbs for fragrance. This utilitarian concoction got the job done, but it wasn't exactly a spa experience. Making soap was often a homemade affair, with settlers rendering fat from livestock and combining it with lye made from wood ashes. While it sounds rustic and a bit greasy, this was the only way to keep clean in a world without mass-produced toiletries. The simplicity of Wild West soap making reflects the resourcefulness of the era. While washing with animal fat might sound unappealing now, it was a practical solution for pioneers dealing with limited resources. Today, it's a reminder of how far we've come in turning hygiene into a daily luxury. Number 2. Oral hygiene in the Wild West. Dental care in the Wild West was as rough as the terrain itself. Toothbrushes were rare, and brushing wasn't a common practice. When dental problems arose, there were no professional dentists in most areas. Instead, people turned to barbers, blacksmiths, or anyone handy with pliers to yank out troublesome teeth. For pain relief, whiskey was the go-to remedy. A swig or two numbed the senses, making the crude procedure slightly more bearable. Without antibiotics or modern tools, infections were common, and losing teeth was almost a rite of passage. But despite the rudimentary methods, oral hygiene wasn't entirely neglected. People sometimes used salt or charcoal to clean their teeth, though these were hardly effective by today's standards. Dental care in the Wild West was a testament to the resilience of pioneers who endured pain and discomfort with grit in the face of limited resources. Number 1. The Wild West's obsession with chewing tobacco and spitting. Chewing tobacco was a staple in the Wild West, offering a way to combat dry mouths in dusty environments. But with it came the less appealing habit of spitting. Saloons and public spaces were often littered with spit, creating unsanitary conditions that led to the spread of diseases like tuberculosis and pneumonia. To manage the mess, spittoons were placed in saloons and train stations, but they didn't completely solve the problem. Sawdust was often scattered on floors to soak up the spit, but this only turned public spaces into germ havens. The habit became so disruptive that some towns began outlawing spitting, imposing fines, or even jail time for offenders. Chewing tobacco and its consequences highlight the unsanitary realities of life in the Wild West. It wasn't just a habit, it was a cultural norm that reflected the challenges of living in an era where hygiene took a backseat to convenience. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.